and CEO of DBM, and we have a great session on the next generation of customer centricity. Joining us today are our industry experts offering their perspectives on how to prepare for changing consumer expectations and how your supply chains can best adapt to meet those expectations. Moderating the session is Todd Steffen, VP of Supply Chain Logistics for Colliers International. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you, Amy. I'm very pleased to have such a great group of folks with us today, bringing together industry perspectives as well as a couple of case studies and talking about the physical impact of customer-centric supply chains. So I'll introduce myself real quick. As Amy said, Todd Steffen, I'm a VP of real estate, commercial real estate, industrial real estate at Colliers International, and I'll turn it over to Chris Jones.
Great, thanks, Todd. My name is Chris Jones. I'm Executive Vice President at Descartes Systems. I'm responsible for a couple things in the company. One is the implementation of our solutions, and the second one is really promoting industry best practices.
Bill?
I'm Bill Blair. I lead the integrated supply chain planning team at Ferguson Enterprises.
Great. Chris?
I am Chris Caplice. I'm the Chief Scientist at DAT Freight and Analytics, as well as being a Chief Scientist here at MIT.
And Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Goldsby. I'm the G.D. and Jimmy Haslam Chair in Logistics and Professor of Supply Chain Management at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee.
Great. And Rachael?
Hello, my name is Rachael Burke. I'm the Director of Retail Replenishment at Starbucks Coffee.
Awesome. Well, we're going to kick off the session today with some industry research to ground us in what we're seeing around consumer-centric supply chain development. And Chris Jones is going to kick us off, and Tom Goldsby is going to follow on with some late-breaking research that he and Dr. Alan Amling from University of Tennessee have been doing. So, Chris, why don't you take it away, and then we'll jump into some case studies after that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share the content.
So while Todd's doing that, just to give you a little background, we obviously all know that the pandemic just turbocharged the whole e-commerce market, and I would tell you consumer perceptions. So we did a study in January of consumer sentiment. We wanted to do it after the holidays to get a view of what was going on. It's 8,000 people. They're in Europe and North America. And one of the things that we found that was really pretty interesting was that that we're seeing actually not only we saw increased buying, but we're going to see even a higher percentage of purchases online. And the reason that we're seeing that is this slide here, which is we asked them, why are they buying more? A couple key points to highlight here. I'm going to start over in the right corner. If you notice, I'll call it the 55 and up age group was a significant contributor. And the reason they did was they got used to convenience of online buying and delivery. Now, on the logistics or supply chain side of the world, where this gets to be I'll call it a kind of a good news, bad news situation. It's good news, obviously, we're seeing more activity, but the reasons that we're seeing it are not what we want to see. And what I mean by that is if you notice that highlighted area here where it says delivery processes have improved, only 1/3 of the respondents pointed that out as a reason for them to buy more online. So let's take the opposite answer of that. 66% of the respondents basically did not think that delivery processes improved. And that really gets us to our next slide here and some of the things that we saw. Now, in this particular slide, what is probably the most compelling thing is the answer at the bottom, all right? And so we asked people, how have you done over the last 3 months in terms of deliveries? If you notice, only 27% of them said that they didn't have a delivery problem in the last 3 months. So that's basically the last, let's call it October, November, December, and early January of 2022. This tells us that 73% actually had an issue, and that's just an incredible rate. I think for all of us, we've known that there are problems out there during the pandemic. I doubt that there's a single person that's participating here that hasn't had a home delivery challenge, but this is a pretty compelling number. And if you notice, what it's really around is I'll call it the actual execution here. So arrived much later is the top response, came at a different time. Believe it or not, too early is a problem for people as well. And then the other key thing is the length of time. Consumers have gotten to the point where they expect things to happen a lot quicker. Even folks like Amazon, with quote 2-day Prime weren't 2-day quite a bit of the time, right? So this is a huge expectation issue and execution issue. So let's move to the next slide. So if we look at, what does this mean to retailers in terms of this kind of very uneven performance? Well, we asked the respondents to tell us about what did they do as a result of poor delivery performance. And if you look at the highlighted areas here, you're going to catch some things here. 23% said they did not order from the retailer again, or lost trust in the retailer, which meant that maybe they were the preferred retailer in the past, but now they're in play. So if you think about that, all the energy that's put into, I'll call it attracting someone to buy, getting them, quote, over the line to buy, and then to find out later that your execution actually is going to hurt you in the long run. Now, the other one that we think is also very scary, even though the number is very low, is the number of respondents who said that they told friends or family to avoid the retailer. That was 17%. Now, if we think about this in terms of online reviews and everything else, there's a huge multiplier effect here. So from our perspective, there's a lot of risk to the retail community and home delivery, given that one, we saw that 3/4 of them the delivery or consumers are having challenges, and then equally, then a significant percentage of those people are reacting adversely to that retailer, which could mean loss of future business. So with that in mind, I'll turn it over to Tom.
Great, thanks, Chris. Appreciate that level set, some fascinating stats to get us started. And as Todd indicated at the top of the program, some work that we undertook at the University of Tennessee, I conducted alongside Alan Amling, and Todd had a significant role in this work as well. So I want to thank you for that. We tried to understand the various pathways to reach the diabolical consumer. And we had some very ambitious goals for the researcher. We wanted to understand the economics of fulfilling customer orders. But first, we had to map out the various pathways, the means by which you could reach the consumer. And we started off by breaking the problem down in terms of fulfillment, delivery, and also returns that our research partners indicated we really needed to think about beyond just getting the product to consumers, but also the path back, given that so much product comes back in returns. But with regard to that first piece, fulfillment, here you see the 10 different fulfillment models that we identified. And I've kind of spoken for a moment so that you can get a chance to read down through these and see the brief description employed. And they range from those that are quite mature, from having a national distribution center, which you might be using to ship nationwide. So that would mean you'd have a very long last mile on average in order to reach that consumer. You might have a multitude of regional distribution centers. And by virtue of that regional approach, you're getting closer on average to consumers, but it's more facilities that you need to operate. And then there's also the direct pathway from manufacturer. Also, we then get into different avenues of fulfillment that would be more, or I should say less mature and more novel, that would bring us into more recent times, variations on e-fulfillment, even bringing in gig economy, crowdsourced services maybe to help us, as well as some at the very bottom of this diagram that are not yet common at all, such as fulfill from dark store and fulfill from mobile delivery hub. Those things that are largely experimental, may be employed on a small scale basis to date. Well, once you fulfill, you're then responsible for the delivery piece. And if we could go to the next slide, we took a very similar approach to identifying 8 different delivery models that might be employed, as well as indicated here, again, using the same approach from most mature to least mature, or more experimental in nature. So from using incumbent parcel national carriers, the likes of UPS, FedEx, DHL, to provide that last mile, whether it's truly a few miles or maybe hundreds or thousands of miles, postal injection, which is something typically smaller our retailers and vendors tend to employ in order to gain some postal service cost savings. Regional carriers have seen tremendous growth in recent times, and so we have them captured. Also notice that we've looked at ways in which the consumer is responsible for that last mile fulfillment. If you think of BOPUS, buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, that's where the consumer assumes the responsibility. We also wanted to get into, as indicated, some of those more cutting edge things with crowdsourced gig economy solutions that are seeing a lot of interest and immense amounts of venture capital being directed toward them. And we also thought we might want to get ahead of autonomous delivery robots. And I'm here on the campus of the University of Tennessee, and as I look out, I do see some very small mobile robots that are delivering food items to kids around campus. There are chances that we're going to be seeing those same robots on a larger scale hitting the roadways. And we've seen some test marketing among the likes of Domino's and others, Kroger, employing that. So it's not to say all of the fulfillment models, those 10 fulfillment models you saw on the previous slide, would work with all 8 of these delivery models. 10 times 8 would suggest we'd have 80 different variants. Truth is, as we start to look at the compatibility matrix, it's about half of that number tend to work together. But it still means there are many different ways to reach that diabolical consumer. And I'm anxious to hear about some of those ways. And I think that's where we're going to turn to the case study. And I think Bill Blair of Ferguson is going to lead us off there.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I think we would all violently agree that delivering on time and in full to the end customer has never been more elusive in the last 18 months. And what I've tried to do here is just summarize some of the things that we've leaned on at Ferguson that we've benefited from, and I'm also trying to encapsulate kind of where we're going in terms of supply chain visibility and metrics. So the first thing I would say is it's all about the data, right? And I think what we've benefited from is just a weekly disciplined approach to looking at data, looking at variability in the supply chain, and really letting what's the data telling us and where is it leading us, and trying to understand those different sources of variation in terms of where they're occurring. So I'd point to 2 things in this space. First, I would say, a lot of data collection, a lot of analytics for us around calibrating the supply chain from a planning perspective. Given the lead times, the variability that's being demonstrated, we want to make sure our planning processes are tuned up. And the second thing I'd offer is we are taking a fresh look at product segmentation. So we're trying to go above and beyond the traditional, velocity analysis. We're trying to also look at the critical dependencies in our product portfolio. We have a very complex portfolio, roughly 1 million SKU DC combinations. So we thought it was important to look at segmentation again and try to carve out the vital few SKUs. We're always striving for more data, right? So in the space of end-to-end supply chain variability, we've started to partner with Project 44 in terms of getting more real-time visibility in terms of the transportation movements, and that specifically within our import supply chain. So trying to bolster our data collection and our analytics there. And then finally, I'd offer that in terms of the final moment of truth with the customer, we really strive to make that frictionless, right? So I point to some of our progress in pro pickup both at the counter and the lockers, right? So obviously we need to recognize our customers operate completely independently of us, right? So we want to make sure that we're that we're being efficient, and again trying to be frictionless with that final step, that final moment of truth. So that's kind of a summary of what's happened at Ferguson in terms of last year or so, things we benefited from, and kind of a good look at where we're going as well. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Rachael from Starbucks.
Thanks so much, Bill. So here at Starbucks, our mission at its core is to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. And in our stores, we use that ritual to connect over coffee, uplift the everyday experience, and drive deeper human connection. Our mission and values are at the heart of what makes Starbucks unique. It's really our value proposition for our customers, and it's what differentiates us. Our partners, which is what we call everybody that works at Starbucks, are the heartbeat. And the people come to us not only for coffee, but for the people and the meaningful connections that they're able to create. We see a correlation in customer engagement to transactions, and we track this data together at each of our stores. Our customer engagement scores show that the number 1 and 2 reasons that customers come and feel engaged is through that customer connection and the effort that the baristas give to getting to know each customer that they interact with. And over half of our store partners said that connecting with customers is the number 1 reason that they love their job. We also know from customer engagement feedback that our customers are aware that the partner experience and how it impacts their ability to connect with their barista when they come in for their coffee every day. So at Starbucks, in our support center, we believe that everything that we do, we need to make sure that the partner experience exceeds that of the customer experience, and that's what enables our growth. So in order to do that, we have created a team, the end-to-end team, which is really that bridge between the supply chain and our retail stores. And our vision is to start with the customer. So bring that supply chain into our retail stores, transfer the end-to-end inventory, transforming the end-to-end inventory flow to create an inventory experience for our stores that just works. So historically, for context, we've had sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to supply chain and delivery into our stores, and it has led to some really inefficient operations in our stores. And so we believe that by radically transforming this experience, it will increase our customer engagement and ultimately then increase transactions. So the goal here is for us to be able to give time back to our partners by building a more efficient supply chain. Up until about 6 months ago, store managers were responsible for all aspects of inventory management in their store, including daily ordering. This accounted for about 6 hours a day of their daily tasks, not spent helping customers. Planning suggested orders to the stores so that they could react to, adjust them. Those order suggestions were not high quality. We were leveraging outdated technology that did not meet the needs of the Starbucks retail business. And even though store partners managed their own orders, only 17% believed they had the right inventory to meet the needs of the business in their store. So we saw a need to change. We thought, updating our technology, sending better order suggestions, and then ultimately being able to relieve them from that task of having to manage those daily orders would lead to more happy partners and ultimately happier customers. So in November 2021, we transitioned to automated ordering, leveraging new technology and advanced algorithms. This gives back time to our store partners to do what they do best and connect with the customers. These improved forecasting algorithms and technology drive the business growth by optimizing for profit across all products in the portfolio. Automated ordering makes demand more predictable, which ultimately will allow our supply chain to build inventory and logistics strategies that are right-sized for demand. Ultimately, the goal is that we completely remove the daily inventory tasks, except for those that are defined as exceptions or needed to meet regulatory requirements from our store partners. And that from a supply chain, we can govern and control the inventory flow in all forms from the supplier to the customer production position to improve resiliency, enable fulfillment flexibility, and efficiently match supply and demand. Inventory flow modeling and solutioning enables the supply chain to grow costs in a steady and predictable rate compared to revenue growth by making existing capacity operate more efficiently, reducing the need of safety stock in our distribution centers, as well as optimizing fulfillment and routing. If you want to flip to the next slide. Now that we've unlocked automated ordering, we have that as a foundation to enable us to radically transform inventory across the ecosystem. So additional things that we have in our future is, right now we've automated for food and lobby. So we have an ambitious goal to also automate for our beverage components. We also want to remove the need for stores to have to count. So installing continuous inventory monitoring in the stores is another avenue that we're exploring. We want to automate receiving so that the stores don't have to complete that task. All of these things together will really tackle that 6 hours in a meaningful way. and give all that time back so that the partners can be connecting with our customers. More to come, but this is, really what we see as a huge unlock for us to be able to continue to grow our retail business at Starbucks. So
Thank
now
you
I'll
so
hand it
much.
over to Chris Caplice, who will talk about transportation and the distribution impact on customer-centric supply chains.
All right. Thanks, Rachel. So I'm here to talk about the middle mile because you can't have a final mile until you got a middle mile, right? And so that distribution from whether it's manufacturer, or regional center, or national center to that final fulfillment point. So you need the middle mile to do everything that Tom was talking about for those different ways of getting to the customer, to support what Rachel was talking about or what Bill was talking about. So what I want to do is talk about 3 things that have happened during the pandemic that'll probably stick. These are like silver linings that we found and might influence things going forward. So the first is the level of service trade-off. As anyone in this industry knows, a lot of retailers have come up with the OTIF penalty structure, which means that unless you deliver on time and in full, there's a penalty incurred. And the thought behind it makes sense. You want to have each vendor solve their own problems. And during the pandemic, the trade-off typically was I'd rather send it on time, because you couldn't wait. Manufacturing was catching up to demand. Demand was peaking across the different CPG and food sectors. And so you're just shoving stuff as fast as possible. Well, since the pandemic, that has switched now, especially with the rising fuel prices, which have gone up by 2x in the last 16 months to a little over $5 a gallon. Price of fuel went up so high that most shippers didn't have the fuel surcharge chart anymore. It went off the chart. And so they had to republish those. But this is switching that trade-off. And now it's making that in full makes more sense, not necessarily to be in full, but it reduces the number of truckloads. And so we're seeing a lot of different changes in the level of service here based off of the efficiency and economics of that middle mile delivery. On the procurement side, this has been a big change. It's been bubbling actually since 2018, the last time we had a real big capacity crisis. And that there's shifting from spending all your time doing this optimal planning exercise, the annual RFP, down to smarter execution. Because the way systems that were developed in the 90s and early 2000s, all the expertise and the analytical horsepower was in developing the plan. Execution was treated like a wood chipper, right? It could only handle certain things in a routing guide. Well, there's been failures there because things change. Transportation's bought in a 2-stage process. You set up your contracts, but then you have an execution. And what happened in 2018 and throughout the pandemic, those RFPs led to routing guides that failed. And so we're seeing movement now. We're not getting rid of the annual RFPs, but we're seeing smaller, faster, more frequent, what's called mini bids. We're seeing more smaller scale engagements, and we're seeing more segmentation that is much smarter of the network. And so what we're seeing is shippers are starting to segment their whole network and saying, okay, what should go out by private or dedicated fleet, dedicated assets? What should go out by contract, that annual RFP, or maybe a quarterly RFP? And then what should I do for the dynamic side of things or the spot side? It used to be pre-2018, the spot market was the mode of last resort. And so we're seeing now that shippers are recognizing that it's going to happen during the year, right? The routing guide doesn't happen perfectly. It never happens perfectly, even when there's a soft market. So instead of ignoring and hoping that spot or dynamic rates don't happen, why don't you include it in your strategy? So we're seeing spot as part of your strategy starting to happen with more dynamic relationships that shippers will have with brokers and with carriers. And so what they will have is something, so it's not even in the routing guide. I don't have a contract for these onesie, twosie lanes that happen infrequently and that I really can't predict. You're dynamically sending those out to a broker, whether it's asset-based or non-asset-based provider, and having an instant connection and using something, some kind of index to keep it within a guideline, such as what DAT provides, keeps it within something acceptable, but you don't spend a lot of time on it. So the big takeaway from this is that we're seeing shippers better segment and use that whole portfolio. And they can do this because the execution systems have gotten better. Technology is better. The data is here. As Bill was saying, you have much better access to data. And the big thing is companies and executives are getting more comfortable with uncertainty. Because the downside of putting a spot or dynamic in your strategy, it's not a set number, right? So you're going to be dealing naturally with some uncertainty. But the argument is you might as well plan for it than hope that it doesn't happen. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of changing in procurement. It's impacting on how you forecast and how you budget. It's seeing that shippers need more reliance on data out there and forecasts in the system. And the last thing that I think's really popped out is that, yes, trucking moves point to point and we focus on those lines, those arcs, but you really need to focus on the nodes, right? And these are the facilities, whether it's for your origin or to your customer's location. And we're finding that there's better tracking. Bill talked about using Project 44 for end-to-end tracking. What that's doing is uncovering a lot of the inefficiency that's in the market right now. We talk about, and we've been talking about a driver shortage since I was in elementary school. But what we would argue up here at MIT, we've done studies, and it's really not a driver shortage as much as an inefficient market. We're finding that drivers, long-haul drivers, spend about 6.5 hours driving when they could do 11. And so what we're finding is that they're waiting. They're waiting either at origins or destinations, and that's just eating into their drive time. And if every driver was able to increase their time incrementally, it would solve that driver shortage. And so what we're finding is that shippers now are starting to take more of an effort to try to look at their nodes, not just their own, but for their customers as well as their suppliers, and trying to figure out how can I make it more efficient. So we're seeing there's a huge opportunity here for better scheduling, better tracking and tracing. A lot of companies starting to do this, and we're finding that it's starting to be taken more seriously because it will require investment from the companies. So while I don't, my stuff doesn't touch the customers, we enable that to happen. So the middle mile, we're seeing it changing quite a bit here, especially as to what Tom was saying. There's so many different last mile distribution systems. You still need that middle mile to connect that. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to you, Todd.
Thank you very much, Chris. I really enjoy hearing about all the changes underway with regards to the industry insights, the case studies covered at Ferguson and Starbucks, and obviously what's going on in the transportation sector to respond to these ever-changing demands of the customer-centric supply chains. I focus on distribution centers essentially across the country, and I help companies find the distribution capacity that they need. And it's never been more of a challenge, I can personally tell you. The growth in demand for industrial capacity, Class A industrial capacity, closer and closer to population centers has never been more rampant than it is right now. The vacancy rates in coastal markets are sub 1%. We find companies that used to take months and months to decide on whether a site was right for them, and literally making those decisions in weeks, sometimes days, because of the limited capacity that's available in the market. There is an incredible amount of spec development underway right now for new distribution capacity, especially focused on infill, locations that are closer and closer to population centers to drive down that delivery time and bring that inventory closer to the rooftops. But it is just amazing how quickly the pandemic has exacerbated this situation where there's just not enough. There's a recent stat that we could have 500 to 700 million square feet more added to our distribution capacity in the United States and still not top 5% vacancy rates on average. It's not just the coastal markets either. We're seeing massive growth in demand in emerging markets like Salt Lake City, Austin, Columbus, Ohio. We see this rim around California of Phoenix, Vegas, Reno, and Salt Lake City, essentially for companies that still need to service California but don't want to be in California due to the rates or some of the regulatory situations. So really an exciting time to be in industrial real estate. However, if you're trying to find capacity, it's also a very competitive time. One of the greatest examples of a consumer-centric supply chain that's developed over the last, call it 5 to 10 years, obviously is the Amazon network, and we keep a good eye on this. The Amazon network, as of the end of 21 or beginning of 22, is essentially up to about 1,500 facilities across the country, 483 million square feet. And the key to that performance of that network is being close to consumers. They've put 840 last mile facilities in place really within the last 5 years, totaling 126 million square feet across there. Backing those delivery stations or those last mile facilities up are obviously a network of fulfillment centers, sortation centers, cross docks and different types of facilities. But, Amazon's not the only one playing this game and changing the game, right? Walmart, Lowe's, big companies, Home Depot, Target, they're putting in place hundreds of last mile facilities. They're putting in place all new locations for fulfillment and cross dock and that type of facility. So there's just an immense amount of demand, again, sparked by the pandemic, but was underway with e-commerce prior to the pandemic. And then you see, a large scale demand from third-party logistics companies, grocery companies, micro fulfillment companies, all trying to re-architect their supply chain to become more consumer-centric. So that's kind of what's going on in the physical distribution world. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing and bring it back to the panel and just kind of open it up with a question. Folks, we've heard a lot about some trends with regards to consumer-centric behaviors. We've seen some new delivery models, as Tom mentioned, emerging, and fulfillment models. And then we've heard a couple of great examples from Bill and Rachael with regards to two, household names with regards to overhauling their supply chains from a consumer-centric standpoint. And of course, Chris updated us on transportation. My question to the group, though, is, with all this progress and all this focus and dedication, we're still hearing issues, right? So what are those gaps that you're seeing that are out there that still need to be addressed to really move along the continuum of creating a more consumer-centric supply chain? And I'll open it up to the group, but maybe Chris, you might have some good opening comments, just given the amount of number of solutions and companies that you deal with.
Well, yeah, so maybe a couple things. And actually, it's funny, I'm actually working on some stuff for our own customer conference and literally in this subject. One of the big challenges we've actually see is driver retention. So when you start thinking about performance, it's one thing to have great routes, but you need to have people who know how to get it done, right? And this is a huge issue. So a lot of I'll call it bleeding. It's impacted capacity. There's virtually no one I'm talking to that said that they couldn't use more drivers. But so if we start talking about this, as you said earlier, maybe it's not a hiring problem. Okay, it's a retention problem. And so when we start thinking about what are we doing to make take stress out of the day of a driver, right? So if they're in the delivery, last mile delivery space, you're talking, I don't know, pick a number, a dozen to 60, 100, 200, depending what you're delivering, right? Stops a day, right? So how do you do this in a way that doesn't have them burned out? So are there routes that are I'll call it reasonable, right? So it doesn't cause them to scramble. What are you doing in terms of capturing data where, for instance, they're not spending? And I'll give you an example. We have a customer we're working with that did not realize this. Their drivers have 5 applications they have to use in the course of a trip. That is just yes, it's insane, right? So if you really think about this, I think our biggest opportunity these days is really focusing on, I'll call it that the things that cause drivers to leave. And believe it or not, it's not money. It's no longer money. It's really around the stress in the job.
Got it. Yeah, great insight, Chris. Tom, maybe if you could share some thoughts, that'd be great.
Sure. So something that I'm seeing happen is really a maturation of our thinking around last mile. And I appreciate Chris's data points that he presented right from the outset, as well as those case studies that spoke of how companies are evolving their approaches. And what we're starting to see is that it's not a one-size-fits-all proposition. We're getting away from the assumption that all consumers want the same thing or are willing or unwilling to pay for services. And so to pick up on a theme that Chris mentioned for the middle mile, we're finally starting to see segmentation in the last mile as well, which is to get away from that assumption that everyone wants the same thing or has a willingness, unwillingness to accept whatever pathway we're going to use to try to serve them. And that's true not only in the forward deployment and getting the product in their hands, but also returns. As we recognize there are economics involved here, customer experience aspects, but also sustainability, carbon footprint. And with 21% of merchandise that was sold last year via e-commerce channels coming back At some point, consumers are going to get to be pretty wise that that stuff doesn't happen carbon free. No, there's a lot of carbon involved in getting that product out there as well as coming back. And so I think that we're going to start to break the market down based upon what the consumer is willing to accept, what they're willing to pay for, and not assume that it's a one, size fits all faceless proposition.
Great. Rachel, maybe if you have some thoughts from the Starbucks perspective, that'd be great.
Yeah, so one thing that we're doing at Starbucks, so kind of, thinking more about the ecosystem of how the product flows. Historically, we were delivering, pallets of product to our stores, which was obviously not great for our store partners in that they had to unpack all those boxes every day and everything that went along with that. But it was also really impactful for our drivers. I mean, that was a lot of hauling from their truck to the stores on a daily basis. So one thing that we're considering now is break pack operations. So, having the cases, those large cases that we get delivered from our suppliers into our distribution centers, we're breaking that down into daily volume of product and packing that into totes so that we can deliver smaller quantities more frequently to our stores, which has an impact on drivers as well, because then they don't have to have that same complexity as well as strain on their body when they're delivering to our stores every day. So we see that as a retention opportunity for our last mile drivers.
Yeah, Rachel, that's an excellent point. When I was at Walgreens, we re-architected the supply chain to do that, deliver more frequently in all rolling totes, and that could go directly to the shelf and really stop that pig in a python delivery of once a week where you can't staff for that, right? To take 2 or 3 extra people one day a week to deliver the truck. And it's amazing how much of a difference it makes in the life of the store employees and the customers if you can flow that product in more frequently. So Chris, maybe any thoughts from you on kind of some of the gaps remaining?
Yeah, so I mean, it's fascinating how the different models are going. I agree with what Tom is saying, how there's not one size fits all, but anyone who's studied supply chain, I think, Tom, you studied this a little bit, right? Is that as you increase the points of distribution, your inventory is going to go up. So I'm in downtown Boston and I've got dark stores all over the place. The mattress stores are gone. The electronic stores are gone. They're all dark stores and guys on mopeds making that last mile delivery. So I'm curious what you guys think this is going to do to inventory, because we all know the more echelons you have, the more inventory you're going to have. And to compound that, I don't know anyone who's making money on the final mile delivery. There's a lot of VC money out there, someone said. That's true, but I don't see anyone doing it profitably yet. And so I'm curious what other people think about that.
Yeah, Chris, I can just tell you the demand for industrial space in the last mile it's off the charts, and it's moving us in the right direction. But I got to tell you personally, I mean, I ordered a pool table over Christmas. I tracked the delivery. It went across 5 different stakeholders or players in the supply chain, and then it was lost, and it never came. So
you know what? It's with my sofa that we ordered in November. So they're somewhere in Acapulco.
Hey, I'm interested to see both the sofa and the pool table being delivered on moped. That's something I'm interested to see. But hey, your question, Chris, is the very one that drove us to first look at the economics, right? Because we didn't believe, including Amazon, was making sufficient return on investment. But they're pursuing that customer experience at any cost basis. And of course, they've got Amazon Web Services over here making hand over fist profits to help feed it. Other vendors don't have that. And you're right. We do still teach that square root of N principle that suggests more facilities, more inventory, and providing that limitless assortment wherever the consumer might be. So that's got me scratching my head. Absolutely.
Yeah, I will say though that the delivery driver did offer me a king size bed instead of the pool table because it was the last thing left on the truck unexpectedly.
Yeah, I do think what's really also important in this one, because actually, Chris, I do know some folks who are making money at it, but here's the trick, which is, and this actually came up in this conversation, which is it's all about offering choice. So let me give you one of the big opportunities that we see out there is what we call an eco delivery. So think of that as like Prime Day, right? Is a good example, right? Bulk up all your deliveries and do it at once. Or something else that we do is we actually can tell a retailer, which they then present to a customer, hey, we're going to be next door or down the street on Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning, right? Wouldn't it be great if you took the 11 o'clock slot, right, and saved the environment. Well, we know from our customers, those are like 20% less miles. So actually, eco can mean like it's win-win-win. Happy customer, lower cost delivery, and do something for the environment at the same time. And there are people that will take that. It's actually pretty amazing how many people will take it. So you can do some things like that. And then on the other end of it, you can actually look at value-add services. So tighter time windows, expedited delivery, installations. So there's actually an upside, significant upside in certain markets. So we think really it's giving customers choices, letting them self-select. And then when you do that, you actually steer them to options that do a better job for your supply chain.
Sure, it's demand shaping. You're demand shaping for that
Exactly.
final delivery to consolidate. But to Todd's point, you're putting the gerbil back in the snake, right? And so it's almost like promotions. Yeah, I can increase my sales, but it's not as efficient. But I'm curious, Chris, do you think that calling it eco, even though it just saves us money, does that make it more appealing?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I've got customers have been doing it for years, especially in the UK, which is way ahead of the US in this space. And they get much more pickup on this. 20-25% of their customers will take it. Because here's the other thing that as we get into all this, I call it the market hype versus reality. Like people don't want everything like right now. They'll be like, well, I really can't do anything with it, so I'm fine with taking it tomorrow or whatever, Friday, whatever the day is, right? I just want to know exactly when I can get it. So there is I'll call it some psyche there that you have to kind of understand, but now you'd be amazed. We call it, I did a thing actually was a year ago on personas, delivery personas. There are buying personas and there are delivery personas, and that's the way to think about it.
Yeah, great, Chris.
Yeah.
Chris, you mentioned installations. Bill, I was going to kick it over to you just to talk about what you're seeing on the high-end appliance scale. I mean, Ferguson's off the charts with growing that business. I was just curious about your perspective.
Yeah. I mean, in general, long lead times, lots of variability, right? So, and that means more inventory, more inventory in the end supply chain, unfortunately, right? So, so I think, in general with those supply chains, it's about positioning the inventory close to the customer, aggregating it for those projects, for those critical projects. But yeah, it's a pretty ugly supply chain right now on the appliance end. I was going to add, the comment about Todd, your comment about the distribution footprint, right? So, we've taken some active steps at Ferguson to employ robotics to certain parts of our business to eliminate the needed DC footprint, and not only to become more efficient, but just faster, right? So back to my point around being frictionless, right? To that end customer, that end contractor, I think that's going to go a long way for us.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate everyone's time today and perspectives. It's great to hear from so many experts, and this topic isn't going away. Amy, I think it'll be one of our evergreen topics here at the SCLA because consumer-centric behavior is going to continue to evolve. And as we mentioned, there are going to be, things that are catalysts like the pandemic that really kind of shape consumer behaviors and cause companies to need to adjust and react to that. So really appreciate everyone's time and perspective today. And thank you for being with us, everybody in the audience.